This is The Solo Shot with your host, Jim Sonnet.
This might be one of the better weekday sports days we've had in a really long time, because not only do we have the Masters, we get to watch, we get to track our DFS lineups, track our bets for that, but also we get another big slate for DFS. And because there are so many games going on during the day, FanDuel, for the second consecutive day, decided to make the early slate be the main slate, which means bigger prize pools, pretty good offering as well. And honestly, I think it's not a terrible slate. Two pitchers I love. Nothing else outside of those two, but a lot of good stacking options. So I think it's a great day. I'm going to track my Masters lineups, watch the Masters, and then tune into some baseball later on. Can't think of many days better than that. So let's dive on in and get you set for today's main slate. Welcome on into the Solo Shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and NumberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonnet. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire, here to get you set for today's main slate. Lock is at 1:10 p.m. Eastern. So if you're listening to this after 1:10 p.m. Eastern, go on with your day. Come back to us at 4 p.m. Eastern. For our Q&A show, we will have it today. We had the Dr. Disrespect stream yesterday, so no stream for that, but we will be back today. 4 p.m. Eastern, we can talk about the after-hours slate. We can talk about MLB betting, MLB process, NFL draft betting. I don't really care. Whatever you want to talk about, it's kind of a smorgasbord type of day. So we'll be back here with you today, 4 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter to get those questions set for the after-hours slate. But for now, let's talk about this main slate where we do have some wins at Wrigley. They're blowing in at 10 miles per hour from right field. That would be a downgrade for hitters, but because the temperature is 75 degrees, I'm good keeping things pretty neutral for the Cubs and the Pirates. Temperatures back up to 68 degrees for Coors Field, so that's a plus for the Rockies and the Diamondbacks. There is a chance of rain in Minneapolis for the Twins and the Mariners, and it looks pretty constant. That's noteworthy because this is their home opener, and they have an off day tomorrow, so they could pull a similar move to the Red Sox last week, where they could postpone this game despite the fact the weather's not too bad. So be careful there, as they could just choose to play tomorrow instead. Finally, it's only 54 degrees in St. Louis for the Cardinals and the Brewers, so upgrade pitchers there for sure. Before we dive into our pitching preview for today, quick reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the NumberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Today we have MLB, NBA, NHL obviously, but also tomorrow we're going to have those three sports in addition to UFC and NASCAR via myself and Austin Swaim. So make sure you're subscribed to get those. A pretty big UFC card this week, I believe. So a lot of good stuff coming up from Austin. Make sure you are subscribed just by searching for the NumberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, if you like what you hear, if you win some money, leave us a rating and review as well. It's important to always search for the best value in betting on games. Well, look no further than the new odds comparison tool our engineers have developed over at NumberFire.com called OddsFire. It is the premier odds comparison experience across major bookmakers in the regulated U.S. market. Compare odds, quickly identify the best value, and even examine first-party FanDuel data all in one place. Never settle, always get the best odds. Check out the experience for free now on NumberFire or at oddsfire.com. Gambling problem? In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, 1-800-BETS-OFF. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. For confidential help in Michigan, call 1-800-270-7117. In New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Virginia, call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Tennessee, call the Tennessee Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. Or in West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Pitching preview for this Thursday slate. Jose Barrios is the highest salaried pitcher on FanDuel. $9,600 a tag for him. Corbin Burns, $94. We have Lance Lynn at $8,900. Jake Arrieta is $85. And Eduardo Rodriguez is $8,200. Nice to have him back in the big leagues once again. Now, as mentioned, there are two elite pitchers on this slate. It's Corbin Burns and Jose Barrios. And we saw them both have dueling no-hitters into the sixth last week. So they're very deserving of that label, and they're very deserving of their salaries. Our job today is to decide whom we prefer between those two. For me, it is Burns by a hair. But I'm happily going to have plenty of Barrios too, as long as the weather allows me to do so. Let's start with Burns and then talk about Barrios. Burns is on the road facing the Cardinals. He does get a downgrade because he is on the road, but even after banking for that downgrade, he's still elite. In that first start against the Twins, we saw Burns throw a lot of cutters. The expected WOBA against that pitch last year was 266, according to Baseball Savant, so it is a good thing that Burns is leaning more on that pitch. He's been throwing that cutter 39% of the time over his past 8 starts, and in those 8 starts, he has a 2.38 skill interactive ERA, a 40% strikeout rate, with a 6% walk rate. But he's doing that while also limiting hard contact. He has a 5.4% barrel rate against, so he's basically been Shane Bieber over his past 8 starts. Seems pretty decent. He's facing the Cardinals here. They're not an offense that I fear. They have an 88 WRC plus against righties since the start of last year. They don't get a ton of strikeouts. It's kind of the one con here outside of Burns being on the road. But he went 87 pitches his last time out. Good to go from a pitch count perspective. So I think Burns is a superstar. I would say budding superstar, but that means that he is not quite there yet. I think he is. I think that both he and Brandon Woodruff criminally underrated. I'm going to treat Burns as the superstar that he is and make him my top pitcher for today. I know it's not like bold given that he's $9,400, but I don't care. I'm doing it. Burns is my number one guy for today. I'm guessing that will be different than the way that others rank this. I bet that Berríos winds up being the chalk, and I'm not against that. He's also awesome, but if using Burns makes me contrarian, I'm on board with it. But the fun thing here is that Berríos is also in a great situation. He's at home against the Mariners. That's a plus matchup. They have a 25% strikeout rate against righties, which is a better matchup than what Burns has. And Berríos doesn't need that boost. He's really good. He was throwing more four-seam fastballs against the Brewers. That came at the expense of his changeup, and that's a good thing because his changeup was not very good last year. His four-seam fastball wasn't either, but with his velocity up a little bit, it's possible that four-seam fastball does wind up being a plus. We saw Berríos start to scale back on that changeup last year, and in his past 5 starts, doing that, he has a 3.34 skill interactive ERA with a 31% strikeout rate and a 6% walk rate. Berríos allowed just a 4.5% barrel rate in that time. That ranks 3rd best on the main slate, and he brings strikeouts with it. That gives Berríos both a floor because of the batted ball data and because of the play discipline data, but also it gives him a ceiling because the strikeouts are so high. He's at home as well. So again, Berríos deserves to be the chalk. I totally get why he'd be number 1 on people's list. I'm just a hair higher on Burns. I'll have plenty of both, so it's possible I wind up being overweight on Berríos despite having more Burns, and I'd be very good with that because he is really, really fun. So to me, it's Burns 1, Berríos 2. I would say if I'm allocating exposures, I would go 60% Burns, 40% Berríos, and that might actually be my allocation for the entire day because there's not really a third guy I want to recommend. Now, the normal format for the solo shot is going through 3 pitchers, and I don't want to deviate from that. You probably don't all want to spend up for the 2 highest salaried pitchers, but I'm just saying for my personal process, I might not use a 3rd pitcher for today. Those 2 guys head and shoulders above the rest of the slate, and we should treat them as such. However, if I were to recommend a 3rd pitcher, it would be Taijuan Walker. And the reason I can't feel great about Walker is that the Mets have been a bit conservative with pitch counts after their brief COVID layoff. Again, they didn't have COVID, but they were affected by it. Jacob deGrom went just 77 pitches, and that's Jacob deGrom. Walker went 80 back in the spring, and he threw a sim game last week to help keep himself fresh, but there is some risk here with the pitch count. The reason I'm still willing to go here is that he pitched well last year. He had a 4.60 skill interactive ERA, which is not great, but a 22% strikeout rate. That number actually increased to 24% over his final 5 starts, even though he was throwing his splitter less in that time. Didn't get a ton of strikeouts this spring for Walker, but all of his starts came against St. Louis. All his public starts did at least. So they probably had a good feel for him by the end of that. And this Marlins offense kind of off to a slow start. Just a 92 WRC plus against righties with a 24% strikeout rate. So Walker, pretty good pitcher, in a good matchup, at home, salary of $7,700. I'm not super comfortable using him, and I'd rather just focus on Berríos and Burns personally, but Walker is fine if you want to spend down. Would be my top guy there. We'll go through one more guy and things to watch who you could consider, just couldn't quite get there because he's too close in salary to Berríos and Burns. Moving on to the stacks for today, we do have Coors Field on this slate for the Rockies and the Diamondbacks, and both these pitchers allow a lot of balls in play. So I think these are the top 2 stacks of the main slate, being the Rockies and the Diamondbacks. Between the 2, I prefer to stack the Rockies. They're facing Merrill Kelly, and we talked about this last week, where I think that Kelly's a good pitcher. He just allows too many balls in play, and that's a tough thing at Coors Field. So the Rockies are the preferred side here. We did get Sam Hilliard in the lineup on Tuesday. He hit a home run. Hoping he plays again, not necessarily counting on it because they don't tend to like him as much as I do. But I'd love to roll him out there with Ryan McMahon, Mr. Triple Dong himself as well. So I like the Rockies a lot. I hope Hilliard gets in there. Not counting on it, though, if I'm filling out lineups beforehand. The Diamondbacks are facing John Gray, and Gray was very good in his first start. He had 7 strikeouts and 1 walk over 5 innings, and he did get some whiffs. His velocity was up too, so it's possible that Gray has turned a corner. That's why I'm going to put the Diamondbacks second on this list. But I do still think they're worth stacking here. The longer-term data on Gray says we can absolutely stack against him, and the Diamondbacks have a bunch of under-salaried guys. You got Josh Rojas, you got Pavin Smith. They're both easy to get to. I love the power from Christian Walker. Once you add in the injury to Ketel Marte, I do think it's worth another downgrade for this Diamondbacks team, but I think that there's still enough here, given the park, given the matchup. Given they've got pretty low salaries, I still think the Diamondbacks are the number 2 stack on this slate behind the Rockies. If we're going outside of Colorado, my favorite stack would be the Red Sox. They're facing Matt Harvey, and Harvey held them to 2 runs over 4 2/3 innings just last week. So he pitched pretty well, but there are some underlying things here that keep me sucked in to stacking against Harvey. And the big one is that he didn't get whiffs in that game. He had a 5.8% swinging strike rate, which is actually lower than it was last year when he was a reliever most of the time. So it's no shock then that his velocity was down as he goes to being a more stretched out pitcher. And it could have been due to temperature. So I don't want to chalk it all up to, sound the alarm because his velocity is down, because it was a cold start and velocity is lower in cold weather. But still, so I'm good putting stock in Harvey's numbers since the start of last year. And in that time, he has a 4.95 skill interactive ERA with a 16% strikeout rate and a 9.1% barrel rate. That is very stackable, even with a non-elite offense. It does help that this game is in Baltimore, where temperatures are decently warm. That also allows us to feel better about using the lefties within this Red Sox lineup. And they did just see him last week, too. So I'm expecting a better showing from Boston's offense this time around, seeing Matt Harvey for a second time. I'll put them third on the list behind the 2 Coors teams. The guys who benefit most from leaving Coors Field are going to wind up being those lefties, Rafael Devers and Alex Verdugo. And I think that they get a fairly significant upgrade here. Just checking to make sure the Red Sox are in fact in the main slate, and I actually am not seeing them here. But either way, yeah, they are. Okay, so we're good to go. I had a free cam over there for a second because I didn't remember seeing them on the games and lineups page, but we are good to go. They are in fact on the main slate. But as far as Devers and Verdugo go, they're both guys who have solid batted ball data versus righties. Devers, obviously, much more so than Verdugo, but Verdugo doesn't strike out too much. He can swipe some bags, so they have sources for upside here. They both had rough starts to the season, so it is a bit of a leap of faith to really buy into them, but warmer weather, better park for lefties, and they did just see this guy 5 days ago. So I will bet on them being better here, especially with both their salaries being lower than $3,000. So the Red Sox, number 3 in the stacking pecking order for me for today. The fourth option is the Mets. They're facing Nick Neidert. It could also be Paul Campbell. It sounds like it'll be Neidert, but if it winds up being Paul Campbell, I will also stack here. So this analysis applies regardless of whether it's Campbell or Neidert, but I think it'll be Neidert, potentially making his first career start. And with last year being wiped out in the minors, we don't have much recent data on Neidert, but his minor league profile suggests he could be someone we want to stack against. The most recent larger sample we have for Neidert was back in 2019 in AAA. He made 9 starts there. He has a 20% strikeout rate with an 11.6% swinging strike rate. Ground ball rate was 23%. He did have better numbers in the lower minors, but that was AA, and this is the majors against a good offense. They have a 121 WRC plus against righties, the Mets do. That's the best offense against the opposing pitcher's handedness on this entire slate. Neidert wasn't bad this spring. He had 15 strikeouts and 3 walks in 12 2/3 innings, but I kind of want to see it before I avoid stacking against him, especially with a good offense like the Mets. So I do think the Mets are going to be a top-tier stack for today. One guy I have a hard time with on this Mets team is Dominic Smith because I love the talent. The talent is elite. He had a 13% barrel rate last year, so the power is going to stick. But with no DH in the National League, he can get pulled late in games for defense. Happened in the 8th inning earlier this week. He left in the 7th and 6th at times last year, and that was even when they had a DH because they'd take him out for a lefty. That got better as the year went along. He did stay in for most of the game late in the year, but with no DH, I worry about that. And I think that Dom Smith is risky as a result of that. He could hit a dinger in his first plate appearance. He could hit a dinger in a second plate appearance too, so it's not like he can't do well, but that does lower the projection for Dominic Smith. I'm still going to use him because the power is so good. Like I said, he could pay off with a lower plate appearance projection, but the risk he leaves early will force me to have less exposure to him than I would normally have to someone with his hitting abilities in this matchup. So I will still use Dominic Smith. I will just use him less than the Mets teammates I feel more confident will stay in for the entire game. So like if I have 10 Mets stacks, I would say I'd probably limit Smith to around 50% or so, just because I do worry that he will leave the game early. Let's finish up here with things to watch. One more pitcher I'd be willing to consider if you don't like Taijuan Walker is Lance Lynn. Facing the Royals, the pitch count, no concern for Lance Lynn because he will happily go as deep into the game as you will let him. I just don't think he'll get as many strikeouts as Berrios or Burns, and his salary is only $500 lower than Burns, $700 lower than Berrios. So to me, I think that Lynn is a pretty distant third, and I'd rather have the different roster construction with Taijuan Walker than go with Lynn. So Lynn works, not super enthusiastic about him though. I think the Cubs work as another outlet for offense. They're facing Tyler Anderson. He was really, really good against them just last week with a 23.1% swinging strike rate. That's why I can't be higher on them right now. But the big difference for Anderson is that he upped his cutter usage, and that wasn't some elite pitch for him last year. So I'm skeptical that Anderson has fully turned a corner and become a dominant pitcher. I'm willing to stack the Cubs here. I think they're a decent option. I do think that there is increased risk given what Anderson did last week. So not going to be enthusiastic about the Cubs, but I think they're a consideration as the 5th-ranked stack. And honestly, it's a pretty good slate for stacking, so let's toss in a 6th one as well. I don't mind stacking the White Sox. They're facing Brad Keller. Good job by him of limiting hard contact, which is why I don't want to rank them too high, but doesn't get strikeouts, means there's a lot of balls in play. The White Sox do strike out a bit, so facing a lower strikeout pitcher is good for them. They are a downgraded offense with no Tim Anderson and no Eloy Jimenez, but they're still in play. So Cubs and White Sox in play, but for me it's about the Rockies, Diamondbacks, the Red Sox, and the Mets on this main slate. That is all the time that we have here for today. But again, I'll be back with you at 4 p.m. Eastern. We can talk MLB process. I know Alvin had a question about MLB process over on the YouTube channel. Feel free to bop back at 4 p.m. I'll go through totally in-depth on all this stuff. Happy to answer as many questions as you may have about MLB DFS process. We'll go through the after-hour slate if you want to. We can also talk betting process, NFL draft. We can talk NASCAR. All of my Sims pulled up for that too. So whatever it may be that may be on your mind, tune back in at 4 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts for NBA, NHL, MLB, UFC, NASCAR, PGA podcasts, all in one place. If you have additional questions for me, I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lineups. Enjoy that. Enjoy the Masters. And we'll talk to you once again on Friday to wrap up the week. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.